Welcome to Royally Unfiltered, the show that takes you behind the palace gates like never before. This is where tradition meets truth and nothing is off limits. This week, helping me tackle all the biggest headlines are royal commentators Richard Fitzwilliams and Duncan Larcombe. Now, when I saw today's lineup, I was thrilled because you both are not shy when it comes to sharing your honest feelings when it comes to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. You're not shy about that. And there was a particular article that lit up the internet this week and newsstands all over the world, I imagine, in the form of Vanity Fair. Before we get into that, we also have a new president, and there have been discussions for about maybe a year now of the potential of Donald Trump becoming president. And if so, would Prince Harry, would his visa status be in jeopardy? Niall Gardner, who's the director of the Heritage Foundation, recently told the Daily Beast that he will personally urge Donald Trump to deport Prince Harry if it is shown that Prince Harry lied on his immigration application. Duncan, what do you say about that? Do you think that's too far-fetched to imagine? Do you think Prince Harry's smarter than to lie on his immigration application?
Well, it would be lovely to have a look at that original application because in his book Spare, he talked about magic mushrooms, cannabis, cocaine. And I can't imagine he listed that on his application to come and live in America. So it does beg the question, where was he honest? Was he honest in his application or was he honest in his book? And I know that I think most people believe that what he said in his book was probably far closer to the truth.
Richard Fitzwilliams, I've seen you discuss this before. What do you think the odds are of, personally, I'm like, well, he's over here renaming the Gulf of Mexico. I feel like he has other priorities right now. But what do you think when it comes to the idea of Prince Harry being deported?
Well, of course, it's the sort of thing that makes news. I mean, the very idea conjures up a world whereby, British prince and, well, Meghan, in theory, princess or duchess or whatever you want to actually call her, being removed. If one is removed, the other will surely follow, and their children, obviously, to Canada, one must presume. Donald Trump, I understand, has eyes on making Canada the 52nd state, but I think that will take some time. I think the whole thing is fantastical, but I do think I do think his arrogance as such in Spare, and it was interesting with Vanity Fair's take on it, was that basically he was out of his depth and didn't realize what he was doing. My thought on this, it was known that he'd had problems with drugs years ago. Had that been either brushed aside in the book or maybe given a cursory mention, I realize there was controversy as to how this was leaked to the press, and the fact that Prince Charles was supposed to have taken him to a rehabilitation centre, and it didn't necessarily happen in that order. That is a different issue. The problem with Spare is that he just wrote whatever came into his head. So on security, 24 Afghans he takes out. It's rather like pieces on a chessboard or words to that effect. That doesn't help security. To the international laughingstock when it comes to penile frostbite and losing his virginity. So he thinks he can talk about this and literally talk about it because, of course, what we all know, the interviews he gave, especially the interview with Dr. Gabor Mate, is this very, very considerable detail into certain drugs. And I think it was stupid to have done that. It just simply didn't make any sense. And he should have known or should have been warned or should have at least realized that there was an issue here. And the fact that he didn't appear to even comprehend this leads me to believe that he might perhaps not have included it on his application form. And if that's the case, in theory, I'm sure the Trump administration don't wish to offend the royal family. I'm sure that they things to do, and also there'd be a court case because, well, unquestionably, he would attempt to appeal. But Trump is not exactly the most predictable of characters. So, I mean, who knows? It's going to be something that the Heritage Foundation is going to bring up again. And if it did go anywhere, can you just imagine it? I mean, it's almost like a sort of comic strip. What would South Park make of it?
Yeah, Duncan, we are going to get more heavily into the Vanity Fair article in a few minutes, but based on how controlling the Vanity Fair article makes Meghan seem, she's in control of Prince Harry in a motherly fashion. It seems like she's taking care of him in a maternal way. She is the girl boss of the house. Prince Harry would be completely content with her making all the money and him just being the charity guy and the stay-at-home dad. Aren't you kind of surprised that some of the idiotic stuff made Spare that, why wasn't Meghan standing over his shoulder going, we don't need to hear about your penis, like let's keep that between you and I.
There's a question I never thought I'd hear. Yeah, I mean, look, what people need to realize about Prince Harry is that when it comes to women, he has always played that very subordinate role. It's almost like he's looked for a mother figure. When he was with Chelsea, the South African girlfriend, she wore the trousers. There was no question about that. And Harry sort of tagged along behind her. When Harry was dating Cressida Bonus, he went along to Glastonbury Rock Festival and dressed up in a trilby and chinos and looked about out of place as he could with all her bohemian friends. And I think this is all a sign that he needs mollycoddling. He longs for being looked after. But you're right. I mean, it does beg the question, what was Meghan's role as Harry sat down and started to literally open his heart? I mean, he left really nothing to the imagination, as you allude to in the question. So yeah, if Meghan wasn't involved at all in that process, I think she probably gave him a good old telling off after she read it.
Oh my goodness, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall, but also a fly on the wall when all of these details from the Vanity Fair piece started to unravel. And Page Six has recently they say they have additional details based on that article. And one of the details that they talked about is that Meghan and Harry know that they are tied together. There's no way that they could separate, this source told Page Six. Their value is in being a couple. Even if they wanted to split, they couldn't. And honestly, they are obsessed with each other. They are just two narcissists. That is what the source told Page Six. They added they are worth more together. It doesn't benefit them to be apart. They have all their deals together. They talk about the Random House. This is a publishing contact of theirs, how the Random House deal was similar to the Netflix deal. Random House and Netflix, and I would argue Spotify too, probably just said yes, yes, yes to all these ideas because what they really wanted was the Oprah interview. Now, I mean, nobody wanted Polo. Nobody wanted archetypes. What they all really wanted was that incredible Oprah interview. But they say that there's just no way for these two people to separate now because they're stronger together. I would argue that we're seeing opposite of that. They've both started doing solo engagements. Meghan's walking carpets by herself. Prince Harry's doing Prince Harry's going out of the country for weeks at a time by himself. So I'd like to know where you stand on that. I do think Meghan probably thinks she could pay for the rest of her life with a divorce book if need be. Richard, I'll have you start.
Well, of course, you are hinting at, perhaps overtly referring to, an extraordinary piece in that Vanity Fair article, of course, which implied that Meghan's team had raised, hypothetically, of course, the question of a post-divorce book. I mean, that is extraordinary. That appeared in the article is amazing, but. I wonder, I mean, I really wonder. I do think that he's dependent on her, and I do think that, as far as the book's concerned, I I find it extraordinary that he was able to include what he included. And I wonder whether what role she played in actually helping him, if at all, to put it together. Because it is extraordinary. One of the things the Vanity Fair piece mentions is that the book is actually rather well written, especially since we know it wasn't written by Harry.
Yeah.
So allowing someone who's actually well respected to write it is one thing, but the problem, so far as the going solo is concerned, I mean, I think they needed some sort of a start in a year where they, on the one hand, they branched out to, well, obviously they first tried it out in Jamaica where it went reasonably, except the problem was the people did point out Jamaica might be on the verge. I say might because the latest poll is actually 49 to 40% in favor of a republic, but they have to have one before they become a republic, unlike Barbados, which of course went its own way and didn't consult the people. Then Harry and Meghan go to Nigeria, and we have Nigerian connections, and of course the Invictus can link, and then obviously to Colombia. And I think on the basis of a sort of faux royal tour, they did what they wanted and intended without the security issues, which were actually blazoned on across all the papers. You know, Colombia, one of the worst countries in the world, and the fuss they're making. But of course, if you're asked by the government of any country, you're likely to have a certain degree of security. So that didn't surprise me. But having done that, then they decided to push this. It's all a strategic attempt. I do think at least there's some thought here, because if you look at the way Spare was written, there seemed to me to be no thought. Stupid things put in, penile frostbite and the like, virginity lost and all the rest of it. Who on earth would care to say? All I think of when I hear this is when Giles Brandreth was reading part of the book on Good Morning Britain. And he was laughing so much that he absolutely corpsed on the sofa. That isn't the image Harry had in mind when he was opening his soul as he saw it. So, I mean, my own feeling of the going solo, I don't think it's a symbol of relationships breaking up or potentially breaking up. I think it's a strategic move where they're just trying to see where their appeal lies. The problem is that the Vanity Fair piece makes clear, and this is what I hope does intrude in the consciousness of those in America who are still ambiguous about them, and that is this bullying, because that was absolutely unacceptable. Of course, she strongly denies it, but the facts of the matter are that this goes back, as we all know, some years, and that reared its head again, and so prominently, after the Hollywood Reporter brought it up last year, I think is very significant.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a few minutes. Duncan, do you have an opinion about them being stronger together? Is this source correct in the fact that they can't leave each other because professionally it's a nightmare? Professionally, they lose everything they've worked for. I look at Prince Harry and I say, you're going to figure it out based on your DNA. And I look at Meghan and I think, if you, according to Vanity Fair, already have people working behind the scenes to figure out where you would stand. Also, it might be easier for someone who's had a divorce before to contemplate another divorce, and she has been divorced before. Do you think that it's true that there's no way that they could separate?
Well, I think we need to be a little bit careful when we kind of discuss the state of someone's marriage.
You're so nice, Duncan. This is you're on the wrong show. I'm just kidding.
That was my preamble. hang on. I think we have to be a bit careful when we discuss the ins and outs of somebody's relationship. And the backstory really is, you know, as Richard says, we've seen a lot of engagements where they've been completely separate in public, which contrasts very much. We were used to, every time you saw Harry, you saw Meghan's white knuckles clutched to his hand, you know, and we've seen less of that, perhaps. Look, it's just astonishing that a magazine like Vanity Fair, a well-respected magazine, has dared to even mention the D word in terms of what might happen if Harry and Meghan split. If they did, I think Harry would find himself in an incredibly difficult position. But one thing I would say, and this is kind of speculation, but it's based on what we see. I've covered Harry since he was a teenager. And in the time I've seen him in America, I don't think I've ever seen him looking so glum and so miserable, and yet trying to tell everybody how great everything is and how wonderful it is. So I think, you know, it's one of those watch these space situations, and very interesting that Vanity Fair would have put their necks on the block once again to publish something alluding to a possible divorce in the future and what it might look like.
Yeah, and when I talked to my friend that works at Vanity Fair, she was like, the forensic research and sourcing that goes into an 8,000 word article in Vanity Fair, the meetings with the attorneys, she's like, that's no joke. I mean, she said, we comb through every little detail. So that's why I was personally shocked by the mention of, and knowing how much they did go through it to cover their butts, it makes you wonder how much they had to downplay what they said inside of it to protect themselves. We're still on the topic of books here. Buried within this page 6 article, where they discuss, you know, they're sourcing Harry and Meghan, you know, it's impossible for them to separate based on the brand that they've built together. An insider familiar with Harry and Meghan's Penguin Random House deal that they originally signed in 2021 says that it appears that this highly publicized deal seems to have quietly dissipated. So, you know, I was under the impression we were going to get a Meghan cookbook. I was hoping to God Prince Harry was going to pivot from the peen talk and give us a leadership book, or, you know, here's how I dealt with my mother's death. Look at who I am today. Take some of the resources he has in the mental health space and, you know, get those people together to write a book. So that is what I envisioned when it came to this Penguin Random House deal. But according to this source, it said within the seemingly derailed Random House deal, page 6 was told there were previous plans for a potential wellness book by Meghan, as well as books penned by the couple and believed to be about leadership. Does it surprise you that their deal would fall apart with Penguin Random House, having read how difficult they can be to collaborate with in the Wall Street Journal, in Bloomberg here in the States, in the Hollywood Reporter, the Wrap, and now Vanity Fair? Richard, I'll start with you there.
I've been wondering about Random House, indeed, for rather a long time, because you're quite right. We haven't heard anything about it since the publication of Spare. I mean, there has, as far as I know, I mean, the one occasion that I thought that I was onto something to try and think what might be produced. I mean, in theory, Harry could write about his childhood. In theory, Meghan could write an autobiography. She hasn't, and so on. But all of that would be dynamite, because we know the effect Spare had, and it cost them their place in Windsor, Frogmore, a cottage. And I mean, it caused fury. There was an interview that was given to the Telegraph by Harry, I think it was last January. It was just prior, as I remember it, to Spare being published. And he mentioned he took 400 pages out of it because they were too controversial. Can you imagine? I mean, it was bad enough what was in it, so this was removed. I thought at the time, because they were still threatening the royal family, so obviously with the book, well, this was another threat, because at that time he wanted an apology for the way Meghan had been, in his view, mistreated, and the royal family would give this, and if they wanted to heal the rift. And I saw the 400, the existence of the 400, assuming it does exist, as a form of blackmail that he could follow spare up. So I'm afraid I've rather dreaded this whole area, but now, given the circumstances of his father and Princess of Wales being so ill, or having been so ill, I can't see any moves in the direction of attacking the royal family, because that would be too much. I mean, I think people really would lose what respect they have, and some of them, as you pointed out, haven't, or have discovered the darker side of the Sussexes. But it has taken a while, transatlantic, of course. So I really haven't an idea as to what might be produced, but I would have thought that your idea that Harry writes on leadership or something like that, that's constructive. I would have thought people would be interested, given his military career. I mean, he was in the army, he was in his element. We all know that he said that this was where he was able to escape from the traumas that had beset him after Diana's death. And I would have thought that was an excellent idea. But whether or not she might write something, heavens, I mean, there were the rumors for Netflix, of course, that they might do some sort of prequel to Great Expectations. And there was a romantic novel that was supposed to be filmed. I don't know. But yes, I've been wondering. It seems very curious.
All right, Duncan, do you think that there could be a possibility, or could have been a possibility, behind the scenes with Penguin Random House, where they were like, also, I forgot, I'm so sorry that I forgot the name of Prince Harry's ghostwriter, but he alluded to the fact that it was a difficult process in writing Spare. So do you wonder if the publishing house thought, we got as much as we're going to get out of these guys, let's just call it a day?
Well, I think what we see is that their great value is, you mentioned earlier, they wanted an Oprah style interview and the kind of jaw-dropping revelations about the royal family. And I just wonder whether they've run out of ammunition and literally having realized that unless they're slagging off the royal family or revealing secrets or exposing conversations that have been had between members of the royal family, no one's actually really that interested in them as a couple. I think that's something that they'll probably have quite a time to try and come to terms with that, because choosing my words carefully, they appear to be a couple who have an incredibly inflated idea about themselves. And we saw that when they go out and get photographed after the fires in LA. What a lot of people over here were saying, what the hell are they doing there? Why?
We were saying that too.
Yeah, well, it really, I say it backfired, but it just begged the question, who on earth do this couple think they are?
Playing devil's advocate, if I may, for a second. Here's the thing. You've got this cataclysmic series of fires. If they did nothing and remained indoors and had a very low profile, people would say, but they don't care. We haven't seen them. If they do what they've been doing, appearing and helping suppose evacuees and so forth, called disaster tourists. Because they've done what they've done in the past, they ought to be judged by some standard, and we've seen the standard when they attacked the royal family, including when the Duke of Edinburgh was, as it turned out, was his last illness. We've seen the way they attack an institution which cannot answer back. Here you've got a case where probably it's unkind and unfair to label them disaster tourists, but on the other hand, if you were them, given the past that you have, what would you do?
Well, my argument is I was south of the fires, and what we did was we put clothes together, we put meals together, begged people for money because we at some point we had too many clothes, and we did things like that. But Harry and Meghan, according to a podcaster and comedian here named Matt Belknap, whose daughter and families were there the day that Meghan and Harry showed up, hundreds of volunteers were put on pause and told to take 15 so that Harry and Meghan could come in, walk around with the mayor of Pasadena. Meghan could do plenty in Montecito to benefit the people in the Palisades. She drove almost 200 miles round trip to walk amongst somebody's worst day. So I think that is our issue with it. Imagine what she could have. I know she could have done wonderful things in Montecito, because in my little neighborhood, we did great things without interrupting the cleanup process, the healing process. People, I just felt like it felt aggressive. And I wasn't offended when I saw pictures of Prince Harry visiting a fire station, because he wasn't disrupting anything. He wasn't interrupting anything. But to ask people to take a break, hundreds of volunteers that are there just out of the goodness of their heart, so that Harry and Meghan could get a private tour from the mayor of Pasadena, it was frustrating to some of us, because it looked like a photo op in that sense. But I guess I think we're a little off topic. My rant is over. I'm sorry. Obviously, I'm feeling a little sensitive about this. But when it comes to the book, Duncan, I'm sorry. I think I interrupted you.
That's okay.
I wonder if they could have done the leadership and the wealth, or the lifestyle, the leadership, and some of those straight out of Megxit, and then have been as successful, because we were so curious about them and we still loved them. But now that they have trashed the royal family for the last few years, is it harder to convince the public that Harry is a good leader and that Meghan is Miss Happy Lifestyle? That's one of the biggest arguments about With Love, Meghan. How are we supposed to believe that you're this twirly girl in the kitchen when there's all of these reports about what a mean girl you were in the palace?
Mm. And reports, incidentally, that haven't been denied. They came out in a royal book a couple of years ago, and it was the Meghan Survivors Club, staff leaving in their drones, and the allegations of bullying, which were never dealt with in the courts, which is unlike Harry and Meghan, let's face it. They're always quick to phone their lawyers. So her reputation as being somebody that's, say, hard to work with, let's phrase it like that, is sort of cemented in everyone's minds now. I still struggle with the notion that they are carrying on as though they were still working royals. It's just they're doing what they want to do.
Mm.
It would be quite natural and frankly normal for, say, Prince Charles, King Charles, or Prince William to visit a disaster zone where there might have been floods in the UK and stuff. But they'd only ever go there as a request had been put in. Could you come? And and they'd probably wait a few days so that they don't interrupt what's going on. And you just wonder, is it Harry and Meghan inviting themselves along to these things? I'd love to know the answer to that, because acting like royals when you're not royals is just about ego and feeding your brand and showing off. And I think that's why, if Harry wrote a book about leadership, well, he got to be a captain in the army. Well, that's not a hugely high rank. Although it will have required some leadership skills. And I think most people look at the couple and it sticks in the mind. Meghan, you're estranged from your whole family apart from your mother. And Harry, since you met Meghan, you've become estranged from your whole family, full stop.
Yeah.
So are these really suitable people to write self-help books and talk about relationships and love? They've got no credibility. And I think, they can write a book, sure, do it. But I think they make themselves into a laughing stock, if I'm honest.
Richard, you brought it up, these bully allegations. Meghan was described as acting like a mean girl teenager and becoming cold and throwing staff to the wolves when something went poorly, often due to her own demands. We've all worked with one of those people, Richard, who it was their idea. It was their idea. And now we're the ones being torn into, but we just followed their direction. Does Meghan strike you as somebody that probably acts on instinct or is really, really confident in her own intuition. And sometimes it's not the best decision what she, like launching American Riviera Orchard a year ago, and what is it, where is it?
Indeed, I mean, Tina Brown put it rather well, didn't she? I mean, Meghan's ideas so often absolutely crazy, that absolutely no sort of sense behind a lot of it. I do think the bullying allegations were very serious, but originally when they came out, this is the appearance. Valentine Lowe ran them in the Times, and then the palace started its inquiry. We never discovered what was in the inquiry because just over a year later it was just taken note of, and people thought, I think, with Meghan denying it so strongly, that had anything been published, and of course with non-disclosure agreements and so forth, there was another problem, I understand, that it might provoke the Sussexes. So there was a sense in which we didn't get to know more, and that things have rested. But of course, people have noticed and been counting the number of employees, close confidants, who for some reason taken off rather quickly. Indeed, I think it's about 20 now or something like that. And again, with the Hollywood Reporter, the dictator in high heels quote, the sort of thing. And now we have more, which undoubtedly backs up what Valentine had reported originally. But the fact that her name may become synonymous with being a bully, that is horrible. And for a couple that are so keen on projecting themselves charitable missions of one sort or another, one could argue how well a tour goes or not, or how well Archwell, it's not exactly terribly flush, but how, it perhaps does some good here and there and so on. Could argue that, but if your name, the moment it comes up and you think, all these people have been leaving and all these horrible reports and rumors, and now there are more, and in sources that previously were, as I remember, Vanity Fair was favored by Meghan, certainly at the very beginning. Yes. And this is where we've seen the change. So I think if your name becomes synonymous not just with being the royal exile, so to speak, and all the arguments about, because Oprah had such an effect, but I think that this is very nasty and very damaging.
Duncan, one of the, and Richard, I want you to respond to this too, but Duncan, really quickly, the worst line, I think, from the bully paragraph or the bully section of this article is the idea that at least one person needed therapy after working with Meghan. How do you recover? I mean, I thought Dictator in Heels was bad, but how do you recover from people admitting, I was so traumatized by this experience, I needed professional help? And Harry is the something made up title of BetterHelp, a mental health company.
Well, that's right. And of course, it's not just an isolated claim, although it's a very interesting one, that somebody was so damaged psychologically that they needed psychiatric help. I mean, that takes it up a notch or two. But as Richard says, I mean, we know members of the palace that were given the very plum job of looking after this wonderful new couple that had burst onto the scenes could not stay there for 5 minutes. They were out the door, claiming through friends that they were bullied. Meghan has got a reputation of being incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to work for, whilst at the same time projecting herself as this great, smiley, lovey, squeaky, kind, loving, the image and the reality seem to be absolutely poles apart. And I think the longer Meghan continues to work in the way she works, the longer she's exposed, because sooner or later, someone will just come out and go on the record and tell it as they found it. And that will not look good for Meghan at all.
Richard, as a public relations expert, because that's also the hat you wear, the article's main theme, I felt like, was the Sussexes really were handed incredible opportunities in the form of Spotify and Netflix. And now we're hearing via Page Six, Penguin Random House, but they fail to deliver consistent, successful content, engaging content, and they have a hard time collaborating with these people that are giving them millions of dollars. From a PR perspective, will this jeopardize future opportunities for Harry and Meghan with other corporations that might consider giving them a chance?
I would have thought so, because attitudes in the United States especially are changing. I mean, they've been excoriated here in Britain, of course, for a long time, and I think they're more or less, it's very difficult to see them in any way returning to popularity here, except, I would add, in the 18 to 24-year-old group, where they remain extremely popular, and also is a republic. One can deduce a certain amount from that. But so far as their image as a whole, if they produce something that knocks or involves the royal family, and that means attacking it, and we obviously have Oprah and we have the Harry and Meghan Netflix series and obviously Spare, well, millions tune in or read it or whatever. There isn't, as far as I know, an evidence, an example actually, of them doing anything that isn't related to the royal family. I mean, certainly not the Polo series. Heart of Invictus was full of inspiring stories. It was so long people didn't tune in. That you're looking at a PR disaster, for example, Harry becoming a living legend of aviation. I mean, it was about a year ago, and that was absolutely ridiculous. 75,000+ people objected, including Pat.
Well, that was Pat Tillman. That was the Pat Tillman Award. He also accepted the Aviation Award last year. I mean, they collect trophies like I collect parking tickets. It's amazing.
Yes, no,
that's good PR. That's good PR. Okay.
Good PR should involve a feeling that you merit what you are given. And indeed, I don't think that, I mean, there was the fantastical chase in New York as well. We mustn't forget that. So they do create drama. What they do have, and this from a PR perspective, I think is important. What they have, undoubtedly, their brand has or attracts vast amounts of international attention. So anything Harry does will unquestionably mean that there is publicity attached to it. But if, as so often happens, it's ill-judged and it's a disaster, or it's something that they shouldn't have done, then that will build up against them. This is what's happening. And clearly Vanity Fair is a bizarre example, because it was so unexpected, certainly of me. I mean, and an article that long and that tough. So I think from a PR perspective, they do seem very definitely, since they can't pull out the romantic novel or Dickens. I mean, I just don't see either of those projects getting anywhere. I cannot see what they would think of doing that might be a success, unless we have another of these Faux Royal tours, which they can pull off. I don't.
In which actually, to Duncan's point, Harry and Meghan do those royal tours where they are invited, and then they are showered with praise and love, and they get all of the photo ops that they need, and then the country limits the media's access to Harry and Meghan, so everything that leaves has been strictly approved by Harry, Meghan, and the president or whoever, the vice president or whoever's invited them. So that is one of the rare moments where they are invited. I don't think they were invited to Pasadena, if I'm being completely honest with you. Duncan, I'll ask you really quick before I let you go. Does this hurt With Love, Meghan, premiering on Netflix March 4th, or does Meghan have enough time to salvage some hype around or excitement around her new project?
Well, I think just to sort of extend what Richard was saying, I think when you talk about PR and you talk about a brand, the one thing that's absolutely essential in that, as anyone in those industries will tell you, is authenticity. And I think as long as we see them saying stuff and visiting and being photographed, doing this, that, and the other, whilst at the same time we hear that there are bullying allegations, and we hear that we see that they're estranged from their own families. There's a whole lack of authenticity about this couple, and I think, whatever Meghan tries to do with upcoming projects, I think without that authenticity, you only have to look at the comments, and a newspaper appears online, spend some time looking at the comments, and they are vicious, absolutely vicious towards the couple, in particular Meghan, and even taken with a large pinch of salt. It's an indication that when they do come out and show themselves and speak and do things, it is not greeted with a big fanfare of love. It is treated with cynicism, people questioning their authenticity as a couple, questioning their motives as a couple, and questioning why, if they're such great people, no one in their families speak to them or will have anything to do with them.
I lied. I have one more question. I'm so sorry. Richard, I have heard that Prince Harry still believes that the royal family is behind all of the hostility towards Meghan. This came to me when Duncan was talking about the comments, and he's absolutely right. The comments, even on the Netflix trailer, are horrific. But I've heard that Prince Harry still believes that it's the palace and the UK tabloids that are to blame for the hostility towards Meghan. We all know that it's exactly what Duncan said. It's about authenticity. Treat people the way you want to be treated. It's not about whispers from courtiers to whoever, the Daily Express or the Daily Mail. But have you heard that too, that Prince Harry is still under the impression that there is an active campaign against him and his wife?
Well, this was what, in fact, he gave as one of the reasons for leaving, this fact that he believed that the palace was in cahoots to some extent anyway with the as he saw it, darker sides of the media. And of course, we remember what he said about Queen Camilla, which was not appreciated by King Charles, because obviously it's implying that she'd leave a trail of corpses in her wake if that suited her regaining popular opinion, which was popular, which of course she has. So far as Harry's feelings specifically towards the royals, I think, the idea that he'd get some sort of apology is so farcical that he hasn't repeated it. And he has been careful, of course, since the illnesses that the King and Prince of Wales have had, to be careful what he says. It's hard to know exactly where he stands here, because he hasn't been talking about it, and he was talking about it a lot before. But I suspect very much that, he wanted, for example, in this recent case, to bring in aspects of how the palace settled and what that might have involved. It wasn't permitted. I think that he probably thinks the same, whether he hasn't said that much to give us an indication. The only thing we did discover on Good Morning America, and that was when he saw King Charles for about half an hour to 45 minutes, depending on who you believe. And after that, going instantly on Good Morning America, even if he's only stated the obvious, that illness can bring families together. Even so, it was most unwise to say so, because it reminded the royals that the Sussexes had this relationship with the press. They can't keep off the media, and you can't perhaps control, you certainly can't control, if you spend time with them, what they say. So it's very, very difficult to know exactly where he stands with this, but I would suspect that he certainly thinks similar, but probably his expectations are that he would never get any sort of apology, but I suspect he would blame the palace. After all, the relationship between Diana and the press was one of the most symbiotic in history. It's a matter of record. Endless examples. Richard Kay of the Mail being an obvious one. Yet Harry, I do not think, or at least I have never seen in any statement, has admitted anything of the kind. I mean, the press permitted him to go on his first tour of duty to Afghanistan with an embargo that hadn't occurred since the days of the abdication in the 1930s. They were totally in favor of the marriage, and indeed they were absolutely over the moon about it. Those were days long past.
It's true. All right, Richard Fitzwilliams and Duncan Larcombe, royal commentators, authors, excellent gentlemen. Thank you so much for talking to me today. I loved your insight, and I love, Duncan. It's especially to hear some of your old Harry stories. They live rent-free in my head. So thank you so much for that. If you agree with us, disagree with us, let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. Thanks, guys.